January 17th, 5:34 p.m. Welcome to the show. Since we're in the World Economic Forum days, I thought I would do something about this current situation. And I'll just read from Gregory Mannarino. He has the best take on what's happening globally with the central banks. This is called Central Banks Have Declared War on We the People. So, what is really going on here? Today, there exists a state of war between world central banks and the citizenry of the world. That's you and me. The central bank installed state of war has been a methodically slow, progressive, ongoing movement, indeed, for decades, as these institutions have systematically and collectively destroyed the purchasing power of their currencies over the course of time. But today, this is accelerating at a staggering pace. In some respects, one could argue that central banks are in a race to the bottom to see which one of these institutions can pull the purchasing power out of their respective currencies faster. But the truth is, central banks are working in concert, to the WEF, to collectively devalue the overall currency pool. Overall currency pool is defined as all central bank issued notes in aggregate. Today, every manner of deceptive tactic and misinformation scheme is being utilized and instituted as propaganda by the mainstream media outlets. In what seems to be a very effective campaign to convince people of blatant falsehoods. With reference to inflation, the public was sold the temporary, quote, or transitory, quote, in effect, lie, which then evolved into several episodes of inflation is peaking, when each of these narratives was proven to be 100% false. Yet another term needed to be found and used, and today's catchphrase is disinflation. Disinflation is a term which is generally unfamiliar with the average person, now being utilized by design to keep people confused. The definition of disinflation is, quote, a period of slowing the rate of inflation, unquote. The current disinflation narrative will be followed up by some other false storyline at one point as well, as central banks continue to inflate. Understand, central banks have no intention whatsoever to stop or reverse inflation. The single greatest power of any central bank is their ability to inflate, and they will never surrender that power. The more debt a central bank issues or is called upon to issue, the stronger they become. What central banks are currently involved in is a deliberate effort to crush the economy, and they are doing this by incrementally increasing pressure on the consumer. As central banks continue on their mission to raise rates, this hurts demand by hurting the consumer. The fact that central banks, again collectively, have vastly overshot their inflation targets is no accident. Rapidly rising inflation has given central banks a major opportunity. Central banks have been on a debt creation, debt issuance, debt buying binge ever since the last meltdown. That's in 2008, creating many trillions of central bank issued notes dispersed to a world addicted to easy money. Central banks knew full well what they were doing when setting up an environment in which inflation would eventually run rampant, and that is exactly what we have today. Central banks' war on the people of the world is still in its early stages, as continued pressure on the consumer will be increased in order for these institutions to solidify their position as the lenders and buyers of last resort. Since their inception, world bankers have had but one goal: to one day own the world. Yes, they will have all the debt will be theirs, and the consumers are going to be the ones who lose everything, just as Klaus Schwab prophesied, who's leading the World Economic Forum now, that people will own nothing and be happy.